Wizard 101 is an MMORPG released in 2008 by KingsIsle Entertainment. In it, you take the role of a student wizard who must go around various locations in the world, doing quests and leveling up. The game is based around a combat system where you build a spell deck with cards that do various jobs. Some are just attacks, some boost damage, and some can provide some additional utility. If you're like me and you've sunk hundreds of hours and dollars into this game, you're probably familiar with the starting world of this game, Wizard City. But for those of you who have an actual life, I'll give you the rundown in a minute. Now, as someone who takes an interest in politics, I couldn't help but notice the kind of structure this place is built around, and I figured we can learn a thing or two about the stability of nations by analyzing Wizard City as if it were an actual place, using what's called the Fragile States Index. But before I could do that, I had to create a new wizard and begin my investigation into Wizard City. Oh, and just for the record, I will be primarily focusing on information that can be observed directly in Wizard City, not any of the other worlds in the game. And of course, this goes without saying, this analysis will be full of spoilers. Wizard City is a technocratic city-state built on a magical floating island upon which rests Bartleby, the grandfather tree responsible for the creation of the world in which Wizard City exists, known as the Spiral. The central feature of Wizard City is the Ravenwood School of Magical Arts. It is here in the Ravenwood School where the governing power of Wizard City is concentrated. At the very top, there is Merle Ambrose, the headmaster of the Ravenwood School and co-founder of Wizard City, originally coming from a world called Avalon. Headmaster Ambrose oversees both the Ravenwood School and to some extent the general operations of Wizard City. On the Ravenwood side, the 7 professors of each magical school taught at Ravenwood all have a similar responsibility to Ambrose. Not only do they teach students enrolled in their classes, they also have some amount of authority in the administration of the various districts of the city, often those which are correlated with their respective school. For example, Cyrus Drake, the professor of the Myth School, at one point is said to be responsible for handling a situation in a neighborhood called Cyclops Lane, where there is a strong presence of myth magic. Or Lydia Greyrose, professor of the Ice School, who oversees a situation in Colossus Boulevard, which sees a lot of ice magic. So it seems Wizard City does have some separation of power, although Headmaster Ambrose often has the final say on any given matter. In addition, the professors are selected directly by Ambrose. On the other side, there is the Wizard City Guard, which can act autonomously, but is also directed by Headmaster Ambrose. Within the Guard, there are different ranks such as Private, Sergeant, and Lieutenant. These guys are the ones who are tasked with keeping order around the city, acting as a local police force. However, knowing how to use magic is not a required skill, and if overwhelmed, they may seek the assistance of the magical community. The bulk of this community is the student body of the Ravenwood School. Being able to duel against opponents is a major part of being a wizard, so students are often called on to help deal with any potential security threats. It's for that reason I've included them as their own group on the chart. But I want to make it clear that the students should not be considered as being a permanent part of the state, simply a pool of force that the state can employ in a way that they cannot do with regular citizens. Alright, so now that we've familiarized ourselves with the government structure of Wizard City, I'm going to give you a brief summary of the events in Wizard City that take place at the time the game is starting, and then I'll move on to the index. When you spawn into Wizard City for the first time, you are immediately introduced to Malistaire Drake, the former professor of the School of Death Magic, and who is now a terrorist wreaking havoc by directing a network of insurgents and warlords throughout Wizard City. Despite not even being enrolled yet, you are sent to a neighborhood called Unicorn Way, where an undead warlord named Rattlebones has taken control of almost the entire neighborhood. After this, you'll go on a campaign throughout Wizard City, putting down rebellions and learning more about how to stop Malistaire's plans, which revolve around him searching for a way to revive his deceased wife Sylvia, who was the former professor of the School of Life Magic. In the aftermath of Malistaire's exit from Wizard City, he caused a massive explosion in Ravenwood, leaving a gaping hole where the Death School used to be. But in all of this chaos, you have to wonder, what is it like for the average person living in Wizard City, experiencing this crisis as it unfolded? Well, for that, we turn our attention to the Fragile States Index. The Fragile States Index is a report maintained by the Fund for Peace. They analyze countries using 12 distinct indicators that measure different aspects of the stability of a given state. Each indicator will range from 0 to 10, with 0 being stable and sustainable, and 10 being the most unstable. It should be mentioned that these are up for interpretation, and the score given to a state for one indicator or another can depend on a very wide variety of reasons. These indicator scores are also updated every year, offering an insight into the trends of a country. Are they improving? Are they getting worse? Or are they maintaining the status quo? I bring this up because Wizard City at the time the game takes place is currently experiencing an extreme crisis. I would argue that Wizard City would actually score quite low a few years in the past, before Malastare went rogue. But I am unable to make any observations on that, and so I will only be providing a score for each indicator based on the present situation I observe when exploring the area. Got it? Alright, let's start handing out some numbers. Cohesion indicator number 1 is the security apparatus, which is a measure of the state's ability to protect itself from domestic threats and maintain public safety. As I mentioned before, the job of maintaining security is shared between the guards in the Ravenwood School. Guards are usually well enough equipped to deal with most minor threats, and some guards are reportedly capable of taking on dragons.
Somehow, that guy goes through them every month. First time, okay, he jumped down a dragon's throat to rescue a student. Understandably causes some wear and tear.
But when the numbers are too high, the guards are overwhelmed, and wizards from the Ravenwood School act as the heavy firepower. So while the large-scale threats sponsored by Malastare do pose a serious threat, all it takes is a strong enough wizard to go in and deal with the threat. The issue is that there are only so many strong wizards, but a lot of warlords, insurgents, and other threats. Even when wizards are present in an area, they too can get overwhelmed, and it's up to the player to put down the enemies that are troubling that neighborhood. In other situations, such as the Cyclops revolt on Cyclops Lane, Myth Professor Cyrus Drake sent an army of trolls and warhorns to deal with it, which then backfired because the dark magic caused by Malastare caused those minions to revolt as well, a problem that Cyrus initially didn't care much for despite the very real security threat. Let's talk a bit more about these wizards. Wizards are able to wield magic by organizing spells into a spellbook, without which they are defenseless. Virtually all Ravenwood students wield magic, in addition to a number of civilians who are either former students or learned magic some other way. With so many people having the ability to use magic, it does open up the possibility for violence and chaos should there ever be a dispute between two parties. But at the same time, magic is highly regulated. The Wizard City crest proudly displays, "En magus nos fides." In magic we trust. With all that said, I'm going to give Wizard City a score of 9 for security apparatus. The sheer amount of chaos going on in Wizard City has completely overwhelmed the security, and people living in affected areas have seen their lives disrupted. But at the same time, the structure of how Wizard City deals with these threats remains organized, and there is always something Headmaster Ambrose does to at least try to deal with a threat. And lastly, there are a number of locations that held out just fine during the crisis, like Old Town and the Commons, as it seems like each insurgent group is stopped by the guard from advancing beyond their original neighborhood. Just barely. Indicator number 2 is factionalized elites, which is a measure of government unity in the context of race, ethnicity, social class, or religion. When it comes to the leadership in Wizard City, the only absolute qualifier is magical ability and expertise. We know that other anthropomorphic races exist who occupy roles in leadership, like with Mulinda Wu, their current life professor. They may also occupy other respected societal roles, like Diego Santiago Cuariquez Ramirez III, who manages the dueling arena on Unicorn Way. So although their leadership is less democratic and more technocratic, meaning that leadership is chosen based on technical knowledge and background, there is generally a solid amount of cross-racial and cross-cultural respect across Wizard City's ruling elite, as well as the security force. The only real organized faction opposed to the leadership is the Undead, led by Lord Nightshade, who were sealed away in the Haunted Cave, but were recently let out by Malastare. From what I've observed, it seems nearly impossible for the rest of Wizard City to coexist with the Undead. There is also the issue of the Cyclopses, who apparently had been contracted to Cyclops Lane some time before. Their leader, General Achilles, rebelled against Wizard City because of his loyalty to Malastare, who was able to exploit the weakness of the Cyclopses being loyal to Achilles first, and not necessarily Wizard City. As a city-state, Wizard City has the advantage of being small enough to where any location sees government influence, allowing for a sense of belonging or identification as a resident of Wizard City. In the context of the various crises, the blame is often placed on who is responsible for corrupting the creatures, not the creatures themselves. Unless, of course, they're undead. Overall, I'm going to give Wizard City a score of 5.5 for factionalized elites. There doesn't seem to be any real divisions within the government along social lines, and the only thing separating the ruling class from the citizenry is magical expertise. However, we've observed that individual members of the elite, such as Malastair, can go rogue and pursue their own interests, indicating some level of loyalty to his own family that outweighed the stability of Wizard City. A similar thing happened with the other rebellious factions. Still, I won't raise the score any higher, because despite the dangers present, Wizard City society is not seriously divided by official institutions. The third cohesion indicator is group grievance, which is a measure of social tension based on whether various groups within the state have fair access to resources and institutions, and if there is any history of oppression or inequality. Wizard City has a lot of diversity, and on the surface, it doesn't seem like those within society have had any grievances against the state. Of course, there is the issue of the undead, who have been deliberately contained in the haunted cave, as well as the dark cave. Undead warlords are sometimes banished, and there is generally no reconciliation process. Only winning a duel, and they leave. As I said before, coexistence between the undead and Wizard City is impossible the way things are right now. The moment they were let out by Malastair, they immediately began causing chaos. To be fair, other standard criminals like Ius Maximus are arrested by the guard upon defeat, suggesting some kind of formal process after a conflict with non-undead belligerents. And even though there is a great concern over the various rebel groups like the Cyclopses, corrupted Fire Elves, and corrupted Fairies, we see time and time again that once they are defeated, there is a surprising willingness to reconcile and tolerate these groups once order has been restored. Additionally, when the Gobbler Revolt on Colossus Boulevard is defeated, when Headmaster Ambrose learns that they are afraid of returning to their home, he is actually willing to allow the Gobblers to stay on the streets as long as they remain peaceful. I'm giving Wizard City a score of 4 on this indicator. The undead seem to be the only group which Wizard City has ever repeatedly acted against as a whole, but otherwise, different groups tend to be treated with respect by state institutions. I don't want the score to be too low either though, because even if both Wizard City and the rebel groups have no true animosity against each other, there is still an ongoing conflict, albeit stoked by Malastair, that is being fought along racial lines. The first economic indicator is economic decline and poverty, which measures the overall performance of a state's economy, the health of economic activity, and attractiveness to foreign investment. Wizard City's commercial scene is quite vibrant, with an entire shopping district dedicated to buying and selling, with an additional trade hub in Old Town called the Bazaar. There are craftspeople and artisans scattered throughout the city always willing to pursue their craft. Traders from other areas of the Spiral, like Baldur Goldpaws from Grizzleheim, seek to do business with Wizard City. It's a free market with very high levels of activity, and there is a universal currency in gold. Unless I'm missing something, I'd have to give Wizard City a 1.5 on this. The economy is very strong overall, with only one shortcoming that I could come up with, being the cost of housing. Wizards attending the Ravenwood School are given a dorm, but if they want to move out and purchase a home for themselves, it can cost tens of thousands of gold. But at the same time, it's not too difficult to earn gold, and there is the option of building your own house. Also, the residents of Wizard City don't look to be especially wealthy, which might suggest that Wizard City is hitting a sort of cap on its prosperity, but that might not be so bad. Everyone has a role that they play in the local economy, and no one really appears to be in poverty. The next indicator is uneven economic development, which is a measure of the inequality in economic conditions across the citizens or groups within the state. When it comes to infrastructure, Wizard City is spectacularly equal. Paved roads in every neighborhood, with diverse but equally robust architecture across the housing provided for the common folk, even if not all of them are equally furnished or well maintained, which could suggest a wealth disparity. In education, there doesn't seem to be any cost of enrolling in the Ravenwood School, and the student body is quite large. There is a bit of a gap in potential quality of education across the different schools. Wizards attending the Balance School do not have a building in Ravenwood, having to learn basic spells from Arthur Weathersfield. Any further knowledge would have to be gained from the main Balan school in Krakatopia, a world located elsewhere in the spiral. There was also, of course, the issue of the Death School, which was moved by Malastair to a place called Nightside, forcing Death students to learn basic spells from Malorn Ashthorn until the player makes the discovery and access is restored. As mentioned before, access to financial and state institutions is granted to all anthropomorphic races, and there don't seem to be any systemic barriers. One minor issue I came across was a correlation between relative safety and the distance from Ravenwood. The Commons area right next to Ravenwood is always safe, and commercial activity there and in the neighboring shopping district is strong. But in areas like Triton Avenue that are under attack by Malastair's dark network, the famous Four Falls Mill has stopped functioning, showing how the distance from the center of safety is also tied to some level of economic inequality during an emergency. I'm going to go ahead and give Wizard City a 3 on this indicator. The only concrete inequality is in education, which in this world is a pretty big deal, so it does raise the score a bit. But otherwise, the allocation of resources across the city has made it so that all neighborhoods are well built and there is equal opportunity regardless of one's origin. But there is still a risk associated with being in a neighborhood that is distant from Ravenwood. The third economic indicator is human flight and brain drain, which measures the consequences of voluntary emigration out of the country by professionals, intellectuals, politicians, and workers. A lot of skilled workers are present in Wizard City, and they don't seem to be wanting to leave even in the face of danger. In fact, there is a lot of movement occurring in the direction of Wizard City. People come to Wizard City to study at the prestigious Ravenwood School under its highly skilled group of professors. And among those professors are people who themselves are not originally from Wizard City. I'm giving Wizard City a score of 1.5. Wizard City benefits very strongly from professionals and students coming in. The score would be lower, but the departure of a wizard as powerful as Malastair did leave a lasting impact on the education of Death students, and it cannot be ignored. The first political indicator is state legitimacy, which is a measure of a government's relationship with its citizens, the level of confidence in its state institutions, and the openness of the leadership selection process. So, Wizard City has no democratic processes whatsoever, and the leadership in no way represents the active concerns of its citizens. So for the government to maintain power, it must be able to command the respect of both the citizens and the Ravenwood students. Fortunately, the power structure I showed you before does hold. We know the guards answer to Headmaster Ambrose because they restrict access to certain areas until you receive permission from him. We know the students answer to the Ravenwood professors and Headmaster Ambrose, seeing as how when a student named Mindy Pixiecrown learns about the Gobbler Revolt on Colossus Boulevard, her immediate response is to notify Ambrose. And we also see that on Cyclops Lane, Nolan Stormgate trusts the Ravenwood professors to be able to handle the situation. Lastly, we know the Ravenwood professors answer to Headmaster Ambrose. Well, most of them. So whatever it is that Wizard City has that you can call a government, does have clear authority, and critically, it does command the respect of the students and the other citizens, with the exception of a few who blame Ambrose for the crisis. All things considered, I'm going to go ahead and give Wizard City a score of 3. Wizard City's leadership is decided entirely by Ambrose, who had placed himself in charge of Ravenwood School, the main engine of power. But despite the somewhat autocratic nature of Wizard City, Headmaster Ambrose is a respected figure, and the professors are held in high regard by the student body. The second political indicator is public services, which is a measure of the state's ability to serve its people by providing basic services like healthcare, utilities, protection, and others. When it comes to access, I would say it's pretty equal among all citizens. I didn't observe anything that would indicate to me that any particular group was barred from receiving the benefit of Wizard City services. Well, besides the undead. As far as healthcare goes, there's an entire school dedicated to life magic, so there is state support for that field. With education, it's essentially built into the system through the Ravenwood School. As for housing, well, there are certainly plenty of neighborhoods with homes lined up all along the street, though I can't say exactly what the cost is. Students are given dorms, seemingly free of charge, but they can also opt for their own private homes, either by paying a hefty sum of gold or by crafting it. Overall, I'm still a bit unsure about housing in Wizard City. For infrastructure, Gold Star. I don't know what to say. Like I said before, paved roads all over the island. Even the undead in haunted and dark caves get paved roads, and cool houses, and a tower. With protection, the main problem is that when it comes to enforcement, if neither the professors nor the guards are able to restore order, they often call upon student wizards to solve the problem. As I mentioned before, the student wizards, although trained by the state, are not a part of the state. Therefore, the state has very little power of its own and relies on a decentralized structure to maintain order. And should anything go seriously wrong, like if, for example, a professor goes rogue and begins a widespread terror campaign, it is in fact the student wizards, not the state, who carries most of the burden. And what happens when the state does try to solve the problem? Professor Cyrus Drake's minions rebel and make the problem worse, and the students have to pick up the pieces. Professor Lydia Greyrose sends gobblers to Colossus Boulevard to chase away ghosts, only for the gobblers to then begin a revolt and threaten to take over Wizard City, and once again it is the students who carry the burden. Simply put, Wizard City's government is a fraud. Wizard City guards can stop bandits during normal times, but if an organized threat comes up, the best they can do is hold them off in their neighborhood until wizard backup arrives. And if you, as a non-wizard citizen, can't evacuate, you're stuck, and a corrupted fire elf will break into your house and let out your fire kittens. They'll eat your fire kit. In Firecat Alley, they're eating the dogs. The fire elves that got corrupted, they're eating the fire cats. With everything in mind, I'll give Wizard City a 5.5. Wizard City services are pretty strong, but the one glaring issue is the ability of Wizard City to provide protection during times of major crisis, which they are very much failing at. The third political indicator is human rights and the rule of law, which is a measure of the fairness and consistency of a state's judicial and legal institutions. The average citizen does not see any real oppression by the state, and Ravenwood is generally not interested in being a police state. The problem is actually the opposite. Wizard City has virtually no legal institutions, and the only thing that determines whether troublemakers are brought to justice is raw magical prowess. Wizard City guards are able to arrest Ius Maximus, but that is only because there exist wizards powerful enough to subdue him. And as I mentioned before, he is alive. Undead terrorists such as Lady Blackhope are defeated in combat and are just kind of forced out. And in the case of Malistaire, even when he is face to face with Merle Ambrose, the headmaster, the leader, he simply comes and goes with seemingly little resistance. For the time being, a rogue former member of Wizard City's ruling elite evades punishment. It's only until the very end of the first story arc, after tracking him down across several worlds, do you actually get to fight him in Dragonspire, where you summarily execute him. No trial, just death. I'm gonna go ahead and give Wizard City a score of 6 for this indicator. In a world that revolves around magical combat, it's inevitable that the main method of dealing with unrest is through force. And while this force can be organized and accountable to the state, there is no legal institution aside from whatever Headmaster Ambrose decides is best. The only thing keeping a state like this from being authoritarian is the fact that Headmaster Ambrose simply is not interested in being a dictator, and the common citizen is able to live freely during peacetime. But we can't ignore the risk posed by a system where the law is arbitrarily decided by whoever happens to be the most powerful wizard. The first social indicator is demographic pressures, which is a measure of a state's ability to sustain its population given the available resources as well as the patterns and trends of population growth. So, as a magical floating island, Wizard City has very finite amount of space, and as we see from the map, it looks like every usable part of the island's surface has already been modified. But to be fair to the present situation, there doesn't seem to be any problems so far that stem directly from the limited space. Also, given that this world is magical, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility for them to just add more Earth to the island through, magic. Wizard City also seems to have a good bit of care for environmental protection despite the urban sprawl. Trees line the neighborhoods, and there are plenty of green spaces, suggesting a great deal of care and forethought when developing these areas, which could indicate that such development occurs at a controlled, steady pace rather than hastily constructing slums or cramped living spaces. Lastly, the water resources of the area appear to be pretty strong. Rivers flow throughout the island, and we even see on Triton Avenue that the waterfalls there serve as a lucrative source of hydropower. Overall, I'll give Wizard City a score of 1.5 for this indicator. There's nothing really wrong with Wizard City when it comes to this indicator. The only problem I have is that, just like with human rights and rule of law, I couldn't observe any institution that oversees urban development, however well done it may be. But that's just me being nitpicky. The only other concern is the finite space, but again, there's really not much to be worried about right now. The second social indicator is refugees and internally displaced persons, IDP for short. This is a measure of a state's ability to manage the inward flow of refugees from outside, as well as the internal displacement of citizens due to conflict or disaster in a specific region. When it comes to refugees, the risk of uncontrolled flow is quite low due to the fact that various worlds in the spiral are isolated from one another, and one can only travel to Wizard City by leaving their world through its respective world gate, which typically have restricted access. As a result, I don't think I ever actually saw very many refugees, if any, in Wizard City. The real woes of Wizard City for this indicator comes from IDPs. In some neighborhoods where hostile enemies are terrorizing the streets, people are either forced to shelter in place or must leave their home. We hear from Sergeant Muldoon that Cyclops Lane is hit especially hard after General Achilles seized the area.
But their leader, General Achilles, proclaimed an edict outlawing all things with more eyes than he, and forced all residents out of their homes.
For all residents who have been forced out during a time where a number of other areas are also unsafe presents a serious challenge to Wizard City's capacity to relocate the displaced people. From what I observed, there was no dedicated area for these people to flee to, and the main solution is instead to resolve the situation by putting down the rebellion as quickly as possible so that residents can return to their homes. Wizard City is getting a 4.5 on this indicator. The main problem is the fact that there are a lot of internally displaced persons within the city-state that is already developed on all available land. However, nothing ever came up during my investigation that would suggest that Wizard City was strained by this, meaning that either 1, Wizard City simply ignored the issue, or 2, that it wasn't a problem because there was a place to go during the crisis. Either way, I'm still kind of skeptical. But aside from that, the government is still making attempts to make it so that residents can return to their homes, and refugees from outside are of little to no concern. The one cross-cutting indicator is external intervention, which is a measure of the extent to which a state's ability to function relies on or is affected by external factors like foreign aid, military invasion or intervention, or financial or political support. So when it comes to the security threats in Wizard City, they primarily come from internal issues such as Malastyr's departure. As I mentioned before, travel between worlds is somewhat limited, making major foreign operations difficult. In any case, there don't seem to be any foreign agents present in Wizard City at all. You could make the argument that Merle Ambrose recruiting professors like Mulinda Wu from other worlds suggests that the talent pool of Wizard City was insufficient to fill the vacant spot in Ravenwood School. But it was still Ambrose's decision, and Wizard City otherwise displays a good amount of self-sufficiency and sovereignty. When we see Wizard City's relations with other worlds, like with the Council of Light, which is an alliance between various leaders from across the spiral, it's more from a position of equal standing as opposed to Wizard City seeking help. I'd say Wizard City earns a score of 0.7 for this indicator. I can't reasonably give Wizard City a score of 0 considering how much interaction there is between Wizard City and other worlds, but at the same time, no major outside forces, except for maybe the intangible forces of evil, have been able to cause cracks in the sovereignty of Wizard City. So it's for that reason I've made the score as low as it is. Overall, Wizard City has a score of 45.7 out of a possible 120. If it were a real country in the year 2024, this would place them in the stable category in rank 140, right between Croatia with 45.9 and Barbados with 44.7. The United States is just ahead of them with 44.5, making them only 1.2 points more stable than Wizard City, based on my personal assessment. Wait, really? Yeah, so despite the really bad rankings I gave Wizard City in some indicators, it is offset by strong performance in other areas, so taking a holistic approach is not always the most useful. We can instead compare Wizard City to other countries based on each individual indicator. And just so we're clear, my analysis of Wizard City is extremely subjective, and there's no possible way that a fictional country, no matter how detailed, can ever be fully compared to a real-world country, especially when it involves literal magic. But if nothing else, it's a fun exercise, You're completely free to disagree with me on how I chose to interpret each indicator, just as you're free to disagree with how the Fund for Peace chose to interpret the indicators for real-world countries. For security apparatus, a score of 9 places Wizard City in the top 15 worst-performing countries in this category. It's in the same spot as Niger, who also has a score of 9, right in between the Philippines with a score of 8.8 and Afghanistan with a score of 9.2. For factionalized elites, a score of 5.5 places it in the more stable half of the world. This score gives it the same spot as Mongolia and Cabo Verde, who also have 5.5. Hungary, Czechia, and Bulgaria are slightly better with 5.3, and Grenada, Micronesia, Trinidad and Tobago, and Zambia are slightly worse with 5.6. For group grievance, a score of 4 places it in the more stable half of countries. It has the same score as Croatia and Albania, who also have 4. Namibia is slightly better with 3.9, and Chile is slightly worse with 4.1. For economic decline and poverty, a score of 1.5 places it in the top 15 best performing countries in this indicator. It's in the same spot as Israel, who also has 1.5. Ireland and Austria are slightly better with 1.4, and Germany, South Korea, and Sweden are slightly worse with 1.6. For uneven economic development, a score of 3 places it within the most stable third of the world. It has the same spot as Belarus and Albania, who also have 3. Slovenia, Portugal, Estonia, Croatia, and Australia are slightly better with 2.9, and South Korea is slightly worse with 3.1. For human flight and brain drain, a score of 1.5 places it in the top 15 best performing countries in this indicator. It has the same spot as Iceland, who also has 1.5. Finland and the United States are slightly better with 1.4, and Austria, Germany, Luxembourg, and New Zealand are slightly better with 1.6. For state legitimacy, a score of 3 places it in the more stable half of the world, just below Slovakia with 2.9, and just above Belize and Namibia with 3.1. For public services, a score of 5.5 places it around the middle, just below Paraguay with 5.4, and just above Guyana and Indonesia with a score of 5.6. For human rights and the rule of law, a score of 6 places around the middle, which is a bit concerning. It gives it the same spot as Nepal, Kenya, Cuba, Comoros, and Benin, who also have 6. El Salvador is slightly better with 5.9, and Kyrgyzstan, Guinea-Bissau, and Gabon are slightly worse with 6.3. For demographic pressures, a score of 1.5 places it in the top 5 best performing countries in this indicator. It lies just below Finland and Canada with 1.4, and just above Iceland with 1.6. For refugees and IDPs, a score of 4.5 places around the middle. It gets the same spot as Russia, who also has 4.5. Italy and Bulgaria are slightly better with 4.4, and Zambia is slightly worse with 4.6. And finally, for external intervention, a score of 0.7 barely squeezes into the top 15 best performing countries in this indicator. It gets the same spot as Ireland, Finland, and Belgium, who also have 0.7. Germany is slightly better with 0.5, and Chile is slightly worse with 0.8. If any of these results surprise you, that would not surprise me. Even within these individual indicators, they still encompass a number of different things. 2 countries can have the exact same score for completely different reasons. But hey, this world is diverse. As for Wizard City, I think that during normal times it's actually a very pleasant place to live. But as we saw with the ongoing crisis, it's definitely not perfect. My number 1 suggestion is to reform the security force. Either teach the guards magic or create some kind of wizard police division that can be deployed during an emergency. They can even recruit students if they want, but it needs to be organized. I really don't agree with just hand-picking random students to go deal with whatever situation is going on. My other suggestion is to create an actual judiciary that can try criminals and perhaps even manage access to spellbooks. Unfortunately, this is not a real world, so whatever suggestions I have will see no real impact. And so, I must conclude my investigation into Wizard City and take my leave of this wretched place.